Hey guys, look, welcome to day three, and yes, we're all doing video from our various locations. We'd love to be doing this with you in person, or at least for Lance, me, Andrew, Krista. We'd all like to be in the same room doing this with you. But here we are, and I guess the advantage of the current situation is we literally can do this from anywhere. The disadvantage is we just can't get together and kind of look each other right in the eye and we miss seeing you guys. So all of you who are on this video, we miss seeing you in person, and hope to be back in person with all of you at some point next year, even if it's not a conference in smaller numbers, right? It'd be great to see you guys. So let me begin. And let me introduce my partner in crime, Lance Gibbs. Lance and I started BP3 back in 2007. And we have been kind of yin and yang, or Laurel and Hardy, depending on, your analogy, for many years since. And, we are so fortunate to have the support of the team that we have to do this for you guys, to bring this kind of content to you guys, to bring, this kind of content to your projects, to your engagements. And it's really meant everything to me, Lance. And one of the best parts about it for me has been partnering with Lance over the last 13, almost 14 years now.
I kind of believe him. I sort of believe him. Maybe I'm not completely sold, but keep going, Scott. Please.
Right. So far, so good. Right. Keep going. All right. Let me dive into our content for Process Automation Day. Please let me know right away if for some reason slides don't advance. That's happened to me once or twice. So look, I love that we start with coffee every morning in our sessions. Stuart does a fantastic job brewing coffee. He also does a fantastic job, talking about coffee and the process, and just makes you want to make a cup of coffee. And turning coffee into process is like one of my favorite mugs that we ever made. It pretty well describes what we do at BP3, right? We wake up, drink coffee, try to help you with your processes, and we bring that more focus, more foresight, more follow-up approach to every process. And now we're going to talk about, how that, just overall, how we think about process automation. And we've got a really nice schedule for you today. We'll start out talking about process automation. Is it dead? Does it matter in today's economy? There are new techniques for process discovery that are new to the industry, that may not be new to us, or if you're a serious practitioner in the process space, you may have already known about them all. But it takes a while, as the old saying goes, the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. It certainly takes a while for new techniques to sort of disseminate through the industry. And then I think it's important to understand when to apply traditional methods to process discovery and process improvement. There's the tendency to discard old methods or consider them bad just because they're older than what we consider new. And, in America especially, right, we always want the new thing, or the new thing. And so there's always a competition to be next and new. We'll talk about BPMN in that light, right? Is it still a thing? Does it matter, right? Why does it matter? And then we'll talk about automating, your choices about how you automate processes. And we're going to cap this off with an interview with Jeremy Warren of Keller Williams, about how to build processes for regular people at Keller Williams. And I think it's it'll be a fantastic opportunity to pick Jeremy's brain about how they approach this, how they think about it, and not just about how they think about the technology, but how they think about the people that they're serving and the business value they create. All right. Well, right here at Driven, you are seeing the 5 themes that we see with our clients that matter, right, to improving their business, to creating great results. It's artificial intelligence. We talked about it on Monday. Automation and robotics, we talked about yesterday on Tuesday, and a great set of sessions there. Today, we're talking about process automation. And tomorrow, we'll talk about application modernization. And finally, on Friday, we'll talk about design and enterprise user experience. And, if you ask me, these are all interwoven, right? We separated them into days to create themes, but you get the most value out of these techniques when you're able to connect them and tie them together. So we'll try to get into that, as we go through. All right, first of all, if we're going to talk about process automation, maybe we should define it. And I picked 2 different definitions. just to give a sense for the way people think about these things. And one is the technology-enabled automation of complex business processes. And I think that's the right kind of definition when you think about process and automation. A second one, which is a little more focused on business process automation, is a discipline involving any combination of modeling, automation, execution, control, measurement, and optimization of business activity flows. That's a mouthful. You certainly won't remember that one off the top of your head, but it does, in a very complete way, describe the kinds of things you need to consider to do process automation. And you can see a nice little beeping diagram off to the right. The first question is, Lance, is process dead, right? Have we killed it?
Yeah, not so much. We've been, and this is an analogy is done, right? From the point you wake up, you can call it a routine, you can call it a process. Some processes are a little more obviously disciplined than others. But we as just humans behave in a process in our everyday lives. It's just what we do. And no, it's not dead. And certainly when you look at it from a standpoint of business, process is there for a lot of reasons. Quite often, I think, processes for some may be viewed in the terms of a constraint. It's not, something that's hard and fast, and I can't really do anything. I have to kind of work within a confine. And the truth is, most processes are actually very dynamic. They're not, status quo, 100% of the standard. But no, it's certainly not dead by any stretch of the imagination. Would you like me to talk a little bit about Scott or that?
I lost your audio a little bit there, Lance. You can say that again?
Oh, sorry about that. Is that a little bit better?
Yep.
Testing 1, 2, 3. All right. So no, process isn't dead. I don't know where I cut off at, but yeah, I mean, this is
that last question.
Yeah. So process isn't dead. It is one of those things where, from the 90s, we had total quality management. Michael Hammer was certainly a leader in that, but the notion was tear down walls, build teams. And I remember that walking around the train organization back in the day when I was working there. That was kind of the notion. And funny how that has translated into now, some of the principles of Agile. And then certainly, in the 2000s, BPM has been declared dead by various analysts. Evolving or changing than anything else, frankly. Lean Six Sigma may have been viewed as kind of old school. It's for manufacturing, it doesn't work, but certainly that's not the case. In fact, the discipline of Lean Six Sigma is still growing. It hasn't flattened out, it hasn't stalled, it's evolved. It's not the same things that Motorola and Allied Signal did back in the 80s. Then we hear in 2010s, well, we got walled gardens. We don't really need to worry about process as much. RPA, kill a process, everything can be, straight through. And then now we're into this low or no code platforms. But again, these are tools. And the tools are no different than methods. So the answer to the question is process dead, not by a long shot. It is very much alive and well.
I mean, I think you make a couple of good points there. I mean, in the 90s, I mean, I remember from a technology point of view, right, when we talked about process back then, it was all about personal desktop, like workflow. Like, there was no notion of work being flowed from one person to another, one department to another. It was all personal organizational, productivity in terms of what technology was available. And I remember at the time working on a solution, believe it or not, using Lotus Notes, right, to do that orchestration between groups. And we had basically a database for each department. And the process was to move an order, from one department to the next, depending on what kind of approvals it needed. And, that was the notion, the best we could do at the time in terms of what technology was available to that customer. the world's totally different now, right? All that orchestration can be drawn as a diagram instead of written as code that moves things from one database or database table, to another. So to me, one of the reasons process isn't dead is because it keeps riding along this wave of technology change. And as the technology changes, we just find new ways to express those processes.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And so what I think, I think at this point too, most companies, certainly I've talked to and worked with and interviewed, back even when I was writing a book about this stuff, I mean, they get processes very much alive.
When I was thinking about, Lance, all the times that we have seen, sort of companies that are struggling with bad processes, and it kind of reminded me of, Jeff, oh gosh, what was his last name? You might be a redneck if.
Jeff Foxworthy.
Foxworthy, there we go.
That's
yes,
it.
Jeff Foxworthy,
Yeah.
right? He had this great routine about you might be a redneck if, and of course he's a lot funnier than I am. But things that you'll hear in your organization, right? That Lance and I hear this all the time. Oh, we don't have a process for that. And I think I've heard Lance say more than once, I guarantee you have a process for that, right? Like we're talking about fulfillment, or we're talking about onboarding a customer, and we'll say, well, we don't really have a process for that. Lance will say, I guarantee you do. Maybe it's not good, but you have a process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, why don't we take our first poll then, right here, and see, are people feeling constrained by your company's processes? So is this something that comes in the way? You have a process, it might not be a good one, to Scott's point.
Yeah. No, this is a good poll question. Another one, right? We're too busy putting out fires to have a process for that, right? Just the fact that everybody's busy putting out fires indicates you've got work to do. Right? Processes getting in the way of getting things done. This, to your poll question point, is when you start perceiving process as a constraint.
Yeah, and over in the chat, we've got the entire reason for process is to deliver predictability. A proven process results in a predictability. Lack of process results in unpredictability.
That's a fact. Yep.
Well, we'll go ahead and end this poll and share the results here.
Yeah, I think that's, right there, you can see that there are two ways to read this, right? And a naive read would say, process constrains me, right? I feel constrained by process. I think more nuanced read is that in our audience, we're feeling constrained by the processes we have, not process in general necessarily, although they might associate the two, but by the specific processes as they are currently implemented. And that is a sign that there's work to be done, right? Right.
Yeah, I agree. As an anecdote, I mean, that typically, and just being real about it, right? People who, I guess, the individual that created the process feels least constrained by it, right? All of these things happen that way. It's just someone does something by their mental model, and the fact of the matter is, it could potentially be done in a broader, more adaptive way.
Yeah, I think the old golden rule, right? Do unto others, as you would have them do unto you. It's always easier to think that you've done unto others quite well, and but maybe ask them how they feel about it.
Right.
Another common expression we get is well, we're more bottom up. And look, a lot of innovation and process innovation can happen bottom up. It's a great way to experiment with new ideas and try them out without rolling them out to $1 billion organization. Try them out in a $10 million or $100 million division. But at some point, you need to advance beyond pure bottom up approach. And then this one, when you hear something like this, like we're looking at a process, we're going through a discovery with you, and there's some fields, and you start filling out things that don't match the indicator. Like the label says, what product are you selling? But in the field, you write instead the business unit you're selling to or some other information. When you start overloading what fields are used for in your software, right, there's definitely something's wrong, right? And we need to be thinking about rethinking the process, rethinking the implementation of that process, right? These are, signs that things have really ossified. You're getting this sort of legacy system bias. And this one, Lance, I don't think you've ever heard this one before. We had to change our process to fit the software we bought.
Oh yeah, yeah, once or twice.
Right.
Back in the day of Oracle Financial's ERP deployment, I may have heard that, saw that, experienced that.
Right. And I think if you declare process bankruptcy, like our processes are horrible, so any process would be better than what we have, then you might benefit from picking one of these, systems and adopting the processes that they impose upon you. And without naming names, you know who they are, right? The big ERP system successors are really, who you're looking at. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if you haven't declared process bankruptcy, like you actually think you can improve and make good on your processes, then you really benefit from not letting the software dictate the process to you.
Yeah, and a lot of things, we talk about when we had to change our process to fit the new software, just real quick. I mean, people do this all the time, and, we call this kind of the hidden processes or hidden work. People are already adapting to work around constraints. People are a lot like water that way. They're going to flow to, the sharpest elevation, the lowest point on the floor to work around things that get in their way. So this is why we start seeing process debt and a disconnect from what the tools are supposed to be a help, but instead they become a complete challenge and obstacle to getting stuff done.
Right.
So one question that we've got in the Q&A right now is, how important is model-driven development in the automation space?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. You want to grab that, Lance?
Yeah, I think it is critical. And one of the reasons is when you look at process diagrams, for the most part, now this isn't everybody certainly, but for the most part, you have to appreciate this is just communication art, right? But that communication art is important. It can you could use lean notation if people are familiar with it, or typical swim lane fashions, or whatever, boxes and line. It doesn't really matter. It's a way to communicate what people believe is happening and occurring. And when you have a model-driven kind of development paradigm, that is really the connection between what is typically offline, disconnected, and bringing it into something that you can viscerally experience what this reality is. And I think for that very reason alone, you take the communication art to a more of a physical, visceral experience. Model-driven development is pretty key for that. It's hard for me to imagine not having that in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, I think a common expression that we throw about within BP3 is that, look, no model is perfect or completely accurate, but models can be incredibly useful, right? And I think the quote from someone named Box is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I would soften that a little bit to say, well, okay, if you're looking for completely representing reality, all models are wrong. But when you're looking at solving a problem, at communicating about either the problem or the solution, those models and model-driven development is super important to get consensus on the definition of the problem or consensus on the solution and how it works. Like those communication vehicles are incredibly important. And that's one of the great values of model-driven development is it allows you to convert something that's abstract into something concrete that our more primitive brains can really process and reason about. I think, another great example before we move on of things that you'll hear is when you can't get status, right? Like what's happening. My customer wants to know what's happening. My boss wants to know what's happening, and I can't tell them, right? I have to go run reports or I have to do extra work to find out. Those are signs that your processes need work, right? You might have a bad process. And, I'd say the other thing that Lance and I believe really strongly is that your company is effectively the sum of your processes. I mean, it's more things. It's also the sum of your people, your assets, your capital, your infrastructure, right? There's other things that matter. But in terms of how your customers experience you, it's the sum of your processes, right? The experiences you create. And you don't want to be drowning like the stop sign there. You want to get your processes right so that you're supporting your customers. And, I think another element of this customer experience to think about is maybe customer experience versus customer journey. If you think about experiences, I like the way Rob Koplitz from Forrester puts this, that experience is how you feel and journey is the process, right? Customer journey is the process you took through to have that experience. And the experience at the end of the day, how you judge it is how you feel. So if I'm at a restaurant and they mess up my order, but they get me the tres leches for free at the end of the meal, I'm gonna feel pretty good about that. I will forgive a lot for a good tres leches. If it's a bad tres leches, then forget it. But a good tres leches, I'll forgive a lot. And by the way, Chuy's in Austin has an amazing tres leches, and you should just skip the main meal, order the tres leches, and then see if you're still hungry. But back to the experience. The journey, though, if you're going to produce a great customer experience at scale, you have to have a good process that, on the whole, back to that predictability comment, predictably produces a good experience, right? And that's the challenge. You can't just rely on individual exceptionalism to produce great customer experience. You have to also have process to do it at scale.
Yeah, I think in the chat, Brad said, he'd like to also say that, processes affect the employee experience too. That is absolutely key in this, because, even at the end of the day, the path to this customer experience excellent runs through employee experience. These things are not disconnected. They never are. And those processes, even though they feel very much, well, it's in my group or my department, doesn't really impact the customer, I promise you it does. I promise you. There is going to be some absolute correlation and even potentially causation to whether a process is viewed as a great thing, a good experience, or delivers on that, or whether it's not. And that is absolutely, right. That's key. So that's a great point to bring.
So this is a great time.
No, I think
to throw in our next poll question. So this poll question got cut off a little bit, but it's: do you consider your work part of a larger process, or is it more independent work? I think the word process and the question mark were at the end of that. I'm not sure where they ended up.
Right. Now this is an interesting one, right? Because I think Lance and I, we talked about this internally at BP3, that there may be only two processes that really matter. If you back way out, right? It's the customer's journey and the employee's journey. And if you can take both of those and those people on a great journey, then you're going to produce great results, right? The results will take care of themselves for the most part. And if you take them on a journey that is highly varied and has a lot of twists and turns and frustrations, then either part of that equation can fall apart. Employees can be super happy and taken care of, but if the clients aren't happy, eventually that bleeds over, right? Like it starts to affect how employees feel about what they're doing, and vice versa. If employees aren't happy, no matter how good the experience is for a customer, at some point that frustration will spill over. And you can see, from our poll results, most of the people responding are really seeing their work as part of a larger whole. And I think that is an indication that
that's right.
That you're going to be thinking about process. The process has value to the way you're thinking about your work or your organization's work. If you feel like you're more independent, you may feel more like process is a barrier or a constraint to you, because you feel like, if I didn't have to worry about that stuff, I didn't have to fill out expense reports, I could just crank and get all my work done. And there's some validity to that.
Yeah, and even I think nowadays we have to think about the customer, we think about the employee, but man, there's also we have digital ecosystems now where there's partners, and partners play such a key role in the value chain of whatever company is delivering product, good, or service. It is important to factor in them as well, right? And because you have it, doesn't make our lives easier. No, absolutely doesn't. But at the end of the day, it is going to be a necessity more and more to be able to better integrate partners into the employee and customer ecosystem.
No, you're right. Thinking about key partners is one way to differentiate too from your other competitors in the industry. If you can make it easier for partners to work with you, it will bring you more business and more referrals. So let's talk a little bit. I want to use an analogy here to help think about process, right? Those lines on the road there, those are constraints. When I'm driving on this road and there are no cars, the fact that those lines tell me not to cross over into oncoming traffic of which there is none, that is a constraint on me. It's constraining my behavior. It's because I might want to weave back and forth. I might want to use the other side. I might want to pass someone who's going slowly. But that constraint enables a higher level of throughput on those roads, knowing that you don't have to worry about weaving through oncoming traffic, that you only have to worry about traffic traveling in the same direction you are. is a huge win. Knowing that traffic will align into lanes rather than just having a free-for-all, which if you've driven across certain bridges in the Northeast, you know what I'm talking about when it devolves into free-for-all. Like, how many lanes are on this bridge? I don't know. It's either 6 or 8, depending on how wide your car is. And, you know, these are important, right? It produces more throughput, despite being a process that is a constraint when there's only one of you or two of you, right? At a higher volume, it's enabling. And then, you know, what we're trying to do is prevent this, right? We're trying to prevent the accidents. And if you think about what do you do with process, right? Having a good process may slow down a single instance of that process running versus not having it. I just edit the data and I ignore all process. But at a larger volume, right? Having a process will make sure you run it correctly, make sure you can run more of it and be confident, and you won't have these accidents, right? You won't have to call in the EMS to rescue your flamed out car on the side of the road. So I think it's always, you know, there are a lot of things in our life that we look at as constraints naturally, but a lot of those constraints actually enable us to function at a high volume and at a high capacity. All right. You know, we used to, Lance and I used to work at Lombardi Software, and Phil Gilbert was one of the great executives and characters at Lombardi. And when he was at IBM afterward, you know, he had a quote at a talk that really stuck with me. So he said, the only way a company sustains anything is through process, right? And now he was no longer running, he was running the design group at that point at IBM, or the design studio, as they call it, not running BPM or process or digital process automation. So he had moved on, but he still firmly believes in the value of process to an organization. So if he wanted to change the way IBM worked, he had to change change their design process. You have to change the process. You can't just throw design at it, right? So he really understood that and advocated for it. And I would say, I think Lance would agree, that the best way the company sustains process is through software, right? So have a process to make that change, but to sustain it, you need software to keep it going, right? Don't just rely on people to remember or some training or some enablement, right? Actually have software to help them.
Yeah, if I could point out something, and, you know, back in the, you know, with Six Sigma, back before, you know, we really had any kind of notion of model-driven, process-orchestrated type of tooling. In the process of Six Sigma, the method, you have DMAIC, D-M-A-I-C, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And everything goes swimmingly until the control part, which is really where the project is then, I wouldn't call it handed off, but let's say the process owner takes on the role that it used to be. This was done through spreadsheets. They would just kind of check boxes, you know, in terms of their compliance and governance. So control usually is where the wheels came off, and that team that helped improve the process is back 3 or 4 months later. So to Scott's point around this, the best way a company sustains process is through software. Yeah, in terms of nailing it up and having something there, yeah, that's exactly right. That is the world we live in right now.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in with a couple Q&As real quick. So first, this was just a comment that process should be very repeatable. Develop, define, improve the process with continuous improvement, and repeat the process billions of times. This also builds process efficiency, and I think we all can agree with that. And then we had a question of, when you're part of any process development team, how important is it to understand the whole system and just, instead of just getting your specific development point right, kind of leading from that previous poll question. And I think Lance answered it really well over here, that it says it's important. The question is, what level and what context and to what end do you need to know? Because there is no such thing as disconnected. Everything is linked to that point. And then when we're talking about scaling, we have a interesting Q&A. How valuable do you think citizen developers will become when we drive low-code process automation? How manageable is citizen development from the governance perspective?
Right. Well, I think we want to come back to that.
That's a great one. Yeah.
It is a great question. But I think it'll be more relevant, you know, as we get to that, to low code, no code in a few minutes. I think back to that first one about, you want the repeatability and the scale. Look, in large part, we focus on processes that have that kind of scale, that execute thousands of times, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of times. But I will say there are processes that execute less often, and they're valuable processes. Think things like company planning, strategic planning, planning your hiring and headcount for the next year, your capital planning. What are you going to spend on factories and software? Like, those are really valuable processes that are not high volume, right? But they have huge impact on your business. And if you need help with those kinds of processes, that is the kind of thing that, that Lance and I get directly involved in to help clients think through, or BRAC in Europe, right? Those are, David Brakenecki, we call him BRAC. Those are things our executive team gets engaged in, because that's the kind of help you need in those situations. But the volume of our work is more about the processes that have lots of volume, because those are the ones that also need to be automated. So when you think about those big, important processes that are also infrequent, they don't need a lot of automation, but they do need plenty of care and feeding at times. Now, the second question you asked, or second comment you asked there, Krista, I lost track of the topic on that one.
So when you're part of a process development team, how important is it to consider the whole system instead of specifically what process you're developing? Right.
So let me give you kind of two, I think, really important thoughts. One is, that is process thinking, right? Is thinking about what happens before me, what happens after, what happens to things that are adjacent to what I'm like. I'm looking at this team, but there are other teams that do similar work. What happens to them? That is process context thinking. And if you are looking at implementing things like RPA or AI to assist with a decision or a task automation, it is critical to think about the process context, what happens around that bit. Otherwise, you end up doing something we call squeezing the balloon, right? I made this one thing faster, but all I did was push work to the people before me or the people after me. And that doesn't actually make the whole thing flow faster. Whereas if I could look at the whole thing, I might be able to tick the boxes for those other steps in the process and make the whole thing faster and get better throughput. So I think that linking of what happens before and after in the development process is critical. That's probably no surprise given the business we're in and the background we have. I'd say the other reason I think process matters right now that makes it more immediate, perhaps, is as Forrester has said, that COVID is exposing and accelerating automation, right? That didn't create the need for a more comprehensive approach to process automation, but it revealed it, right? And Rob Koplowitz at Forrester has several times, really beat the drum that the reason lots of digital transformation effort have failed or run into trouble is because they haven't focused enough on process. That they've tried to create automation without a sense of how it all fits together and what the customer journey will be and what the employee journey will be, right? And COVID has re-shown the light, it's really put that light on what are those processes and how do they work and how do we automate them efficiently and effectively. Forrester also took time out to write a new Forrester wave, right? The Digital Process Automation Service Providers wave for Q3 2020. It's a bit of a mouthful to say all at once. And, we're really, first of all, pleased that they put attention on this space and on what we do as an industry, but also what we do as BP3. And in particular, we have to thank our customers. One of them obviously gave, a fantastic quote to the article that Forrester wrote, or to the research that they wrote, saying that we're honest. Our team is honest, talented, hardworking, truly have their clients' best interests at heart. Right. And I agree, our greatest strength is our team, our people, but it's also our clients and their people. Right. And, you guys have really supported our team being successful in all of these engagements. But I think the importance of this work in the time we're in has just been emphasized by the fact that we're all remote. We can't meet in the kitchen and talk about things. We can't meet over lunch and talk about how we want to change the process. We have to do it over a Zoom call or over a phone call. So the other bit, and Dave Brakenecki shared this with you yesterday, if you were on that call, we shared a little bit about the survey results. Since COVID, what is the impact on your spending, right? And of course, you see an increase in spending on things that are maybe unrelated, like analytics and cybersecurity. But notice that more than half of the respondents are spending more money on process automation, including RPA, but on process automation in general. And almost half are spending more money on artificial intelligence. And then when you add the increase in stay the same, right, you're in the category of, north of 90% for process automation, and for artificial intelligence as well, you're right at, 89%, combined. So it really shows the emphasis on process and how important this is to what we all do, right, to run our businesses.